Emily woke early that Saturday morning, hoping the quiet house in Seattle would give her peace, but the strange heaviness in the air made her chest tighten as soon as she walked into the living room. It felt like the house knew something she didn't, something waiting to be discovered. She tried to shake off the feeling by tying her hair up and starting her usual cleaning routine. She vacuumed the carpet, wiped down the coffee table, folded blankets, and dusted every surface she passed, but no matter how much she moved, her thoughts wandered back to the distance growing between her and her husband, Mark. Mark had become a shadow in their home, slipping in late and leaving early, always with excuses about deadlines and meetings. Emily had once believed him easily, but lately his words felt rehearsed, almost cold, as if they were meant to close conversations rather than open them. She missed the warmth they once had, the dinners they shared, the laughter that filled the house when they first married. She missed the man she thought she knew. As she moved through the living room, she reached for a porcelain vase on the shelf to dust behind it. That was when something unexpected caught her eye. A small stack of envelopes sat tucked tightly against the wall, hidden behind the vase as though someone didn't want them found. Emily frowned and pulled them out, her hands trembling slightly. Each envelope had Mark's name on it, written in delicate cursive. The return address belonged to a woman she didn't know. The handwriting was graceful, almost personal, and immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. Her heart thumped painfully. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the secrecy was too obvious to ignore. Why hide letters? Why tuck them behind a vase where no one would normally look? Emily swallowed hard, feeling her mouth go dry. She didn't open them, not yet. She wasn't sure she was ready for whatever truth they might hold. Before she could even decide what to do, she heard a soft knock on the front door. She turned sharply, startled. When she opened the door, she found Dylan standing on the porch with his hands in the pockets of his hoodie. His expression was tired, almost anxious. Dylan was Mark's 21-year-old son from his previous marriage. He usually visited on weekends during breaks from college, always polite, always soft-spoken. Emily had grown fond of him, treating him with kindness from the first day she married Mark. But today he looked different. His eyes darted to the envelopes in her hand the moment he saw them. A quiet tension filled the doorway. Dylan stepped inside and closed the door gently behind him. He didn't greet her like he usually did, didn't smile, didn't relax. It was as if he had walked straight into the middle of her fear and recognized it instantly. He stared at the envelopes again and exhaled slowly, as though the sight of them confirmed something he already knew. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, steady, but weighed down by a sadness he was trying to hide. Emily felt her breath hitch. She didn't know what he was about to say, but the look in his eyes told her it was something important, something painful. She stepped aside to let him into the living room, her fingers tightening around the envelopes as though they were the key to a puzzle she had been avoiding for months. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, with a distance between them that didn't feel emotional but instead filled with anticipation and worry. Dylan kept his eyes on his hands for a moment, rubbing his palms together as if searching for courage. Emily waited, her heart pounding, afraid to speak, afraid to hear what was coming. "Emily," he finally said, looking up. "There's something my dad hasn't told you." Those words alone made the room spin for her. She felt the weight of them settle in her stomach like cold stone. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but fear trapped her voice in her throat. She had felt something was wrong for so long, but she never imagined hearing it from someone else, especially not from Dylan. His eyes glistened with guilt and he took a slow breath. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this," he continued. "But I can't keep watching you act like everything's okay when I know it's not." Emily felt a tremor move through her, her heart racing. She held tightly onto the envelopes, their edges pressing into her palms, grounding her even as her emotions swirled. Dylan looked at the letters again, and she followed his gaze. They seemed to burn in her hands now, demanding to be opened, but she still wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. She looked back at Dylan, waiting, bracing, because she sensed he was about to break something open inside her life, something that could not be repaired with a broom or dust cloth or any amount of effort she had poured into this house or this marriage. He inhaled deeply, his voice unsteady for the first time. "My dad. He hasn't been honest with you." Emily felt her heart collapse a little, even though she had suspected it. Hearing it out loud made it real, made the fear tangible. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, her breath tighter. Dylan ran a hand through his hair, frustration and hurt clear on his face. She realized then that this wasn't easy for him either. He wasn't just delivering bad news. He was caught in the middle of something too big for him, something that was hurting all of them. Emily leaned back on the couch, trying to steady herself, trying to breathe without breaking down. She had always considered herself strong, someone who pushed through storms quietly and gracefully, but this storm felt different, more personal, more damaging. She watched Dylan as he wrestled with his words, and for a moment she felt sympathy for him even in her rising fear. He shouldn't have been the one to carry this burden. He shouldn't have been the messenger for something that wasn't his fault. When he finally looked her in the eyes, she saw a truth there she wasn't prepared for. A truth he hadn't yet spoken but was already written in his expression. She felt tears burn the back of her eyes but refused to let them fall. She waited tense, her breath held hostage inside her chest, every second stretching long and thin like a string ready to snap. The wind outside tapped softly against the window, a gentle but eerie reminder that the world was moving on while hers threatened to fall apart. Dylan leaned forward slightly, his face filled with apology and worry. "Emily, you deserve to know," he whispered. His voice was almost shaking now, and she knew whatever he was about to reveal was going to change everything. Emily nodded. Even though she felt like her body was barely holding together, she needed the truth, no matter how painful, because the lies had already begun stealing pieces of her peace, her confidence, her hope. Dylan hesitated for a moment longer, then said the words that opened the first cracks in the world she had worked so hard to build. "There's something going on," he said. "And it's worse than you think." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the truth settle into her like cold wind. When she opened them again, she saw Dylan's face full of worry, regret, and something else. Something protective, as if he wished he could shield her from the pain she was about to face. The envelopes felt heavier in her hands, almost alive with the secrets they held. She looked down at them, then at Dylan, and realized that whatever was happening inside her marriage, she wasn't imagining it. The signs she had ignored were real, and this was only the beginning. Dylan took a shaky breath and leaned back slightly, not ready to say anything else yet, leaving Emily suspended in uncertainty. With her heart beating faster than it ever had, Emily felt the walls of her peaceful home tremble in her imagination, as if the truth was already seeping through the cracks. She didn't know what Dylan was going to say next, but she knew it would pull her deeper into a reality she wasn't prepared for, and the silence between them grew heavier, thicker, more suffocating, until finally he whispered, "Emily, I'm so sorry." His apology was the final sign that her life was about to change forever, and she could feel it, like a cold wind rushing through her chest, leaving her breathless and afraid. She clutched the envelopes tighter, bracing herself for the moment everything would break, and deep inside, Emily knew the truth Dylan was holding would unravel the life she thought she had. The moment Dylan spoke, Emily felt as if the whole house held its breath. The silence pressed against her, thick and heavy, as though every wall leaned closer, waiting to hear what he would say next. She sat at the dining table with the envelopes in front of her, each one a quiet reminder that her life was not as steady as she once believed. Dylan sat across from her, his shoulders slumped, his hands folded tightly, like he was trying to gather courage from the way his fingers pressed together. "Emily, I didn't want to be the one to tell you," he said again, his voice tight with guilt. "But you need to know what's going on." His words trembled, and she felt a strange mix of fear and tenderness rise inside her. He wasn't trying to hurt her, she could see that. He was trying to protect her from something far worse. She nodded gently, encouraging him even though she felt her stomach twist with dread. Dylan looked down at the table, the wood grain reflecting the anxiety in his eyes. "My dad, he's been distant because he's seeing someone else," he finally said. Emily felt the air leave her lungs, as if someone had pressed their hand against her chest. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it was different. It wasn't a fear anymore. It was a truth that sat between them like a cold weight. Dylan swallowed hard and continued before she could say anything. "I found out by accident 2 months ago." Emily stared at him, her eyes burning but refusing to cry. She didn't want to fall apart, not in front of him, not when he was already hurting just from telling her. She listened closely, forcing herself to stay calm, forcing herself to understand every word he was giving her. Dylan explained that he had seen messages on Mark's phone one night when his father left it unattended. Messages from the same woman whose name was on the envelopes. Messages filled with private plans, affectionate words, and stories that did not include Emily. Dylan said he confronted Mark about it, hoping it was a misunderstanding, but Mark admitted it. He said it was a mistake, something he planned to end, something he blamed on stress and confusion. Dylan believed him at first, But things only got worse. Mark began disappearing more often, hiding messages, hiding letters, hiding everything that proved the truth he didn't want to face. Emily felt her heartbeat echo inside her ears. She pressed her hand to her chest to steady herself. She had always tried to believe the best about Mark, had forgiven his distance, had trusted his excuses, but now she saw how blind she had been. She looked at Dylan, seeing the guilt on his face, the guilt of a young man who had been trapped between loyalty and honesty, and she softened her expression, wanting him to know she didn't blame him for something he had no control over. "I didn't know what to do," Dylan said, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. But I also couldn't lie anymore." Emily gave him a slow nod, her throat too tight to speak. His honesty meant more to her than she could express in that moment. She reached out and placed her hand gently over his, offering comfort even while her heart was breaking inside her. The table felt too small to hold the growing tension. Emily stood and began pacing across the room, needing movement to steady her thoughts. The house she had once loved now felt different. Every picture frame, every shadow, every quiet corner seemed touched by betrayal. She looked at the envelopes again, still unopened, still carrying the truth she already understood without reading a single word. She finally spoke, her voice soft and steady despite the storm inside her. "Dylan, thank you for telling me." Dylan looked up quickly, surprised by her calmness, surprised that she wasn't shouting or breaking down. But Emily had always been someone who held herself together even when everything felt like it was falling apart. She walked back to the table and sat down again, staring at the envelopes with a painful mix of fear and acceptance. "I should have seen it," she whispered, but Dylan shook his head instantly. "No, this isn't your fault," he told her firmly. "You trusted him, you loved him, you believed in him, none of that is wrong." His voice was gentle, and the sincerity in his eyes made her chest ache in a new way. She hadn't expected him to defend her, but his words felt like a small anchor in the middle of everything that was slipping away. Emily leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know if she should confront Mark immediately or wait until she had more strength. But she did know she couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was here, sitting on the table, spoken by the one person who had nothing to gain by telling her. Dylan watched her carefully, his eyes filled with concern. "Emily, are you okay?" She almost smiled at the question, a small, sad smile that showed how much she appreciated his worry. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But I'm trying to be." Dylan nodded, not pushing her to say more, not asking for details, just sitting with her in the silence like someone who truly understood the weight of what she carried. After a long moment, he swallowed hard, his face shifting with hesitation. "There's something else," he said softly, as if each word cost him something. Emily froze, her fingers tightening against each other. She turned her eyes toward him, her heartbeat climbing again. What more could there possibly be? Hadn't she heard enough? Hadn't she already been pushed past the pain she expected from this moment? But the look in Dylan's eyes wasn't just guilt, it was fear, worry, and something deeper, something protective, as if he was afraid of how she would react but also afraid of what would happen if he didn't tell her. Emily braced herself, her breath held tightly in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady even though her heart felt fragile. Dylan leaned forward a little, lowering his voice as though the walls might be listening. "I think she's been around longer than you think," he said slowly. "Maybe even before you started noticing the distance." Emily felt as if the ground shifted underneath her. She knew things had changed over the last year, but the idea that this betrayal had deeper roots made her feel dizzy, as if she were falling without anything to hold on to. He continued, explaining that he had seen signs long before he found the messages, but he had never connected them. Mark leaving early, changing his cologne, taking calls outside, getting defensive about harmless questions. At the time, Dylan thought it was stress or work, just like Emily had believed, but now everything lined up too clearly to ignore. Emily felt a wave of nausea roll through her. She pressed her hands together tightly, forcing herself to breathe through the pain. Dylan watched her with wide, worried eyes, afraid she might break under the weight of it all. But Emily didn't fall apart, she couldn't, not yet. Something inside her held firm, a quiet determination rising beneath the heartbreak. Dylan softened his voice even more. "Emily, you don't deserve any of this." She looked at him, seeing the sincerity, the kindness, the emotional conflict he carried. He was hurting too, confused, disappointed in his father. And she realized that this moment wasn't just painful for her, it was painful for him as well. He had lost respect for someone he wanted to admire, and he had been forced into a role he never wanted. She placed her hand gently on his arm, offering comfort even while she suffered. "You're not responsible for his choices," she said quietly. "Don't carry guilt that doesn't belong to you." Dylan's shoulders relaxed slightly and he nodded, grateful for her understanding. Emily stood again, walking slowly toward the window, watching the rain begin to fall outside. The soft tapping against the glass felt like the world was crying for her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet sound settle into her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how Mark would react. She didn't know if her marriage could survive. But she knew one thing for certain. The truth was here now, and there was no turning back. She turned toward Dylan, her voice steady but soft. "I need time to think." Dylan nodded quickly. "Of course, take all the time you need. I'm here if you need anything." His voice was warm, sincere, carrying a loyalty she didn't expect but deeply appreciated. But just as she took a step toward her bedroom, his voice reached her again, this time filled with a hesitation that made her stop in her tracks. "Emily, there's one more thing you should know," he said, his expression troubled, as though this final truth was the one he feared telling the most. Emily turned slowly, her breath catching, her heart tightening again. She saw the seriousness in his eyes and felt the tension rise like a wave ready to crash, and she knew this last truth would change everything, even more than what she had already learned. Emily froze in the hallway as Dylan's words hung between them like a soft warning that carried more weight than anything he had told her before. The house felt suddenly colder, as if the walls themselves knew how much this last truth would shake her. Dylan stood by the dining table, his hands pressed against its edge, his face pale with conflict. He looked like someone who had been fighting a quiet battle inside himself for weeks. "Just say it," Emily whispered, though her voice trembled from exhaustion. She felt as if she had already cried without shedding a single tear. Dylan swallowed hard and stepped closer. "The woman, the one he's seeing, she reached out to me." The words hit Emily like a wave she never saw coming. She felt her breath catch as she stared at him, unable to process what he meant. "She contacted you?" Dylan nodded slowly. "About a week ago. She messaged me on social media. I didn't respond at first because I didn't want to get involved. But she sent another message. And she said she wanted to talk about my dad." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small and exposed in the middle of her own home. "Why would she reach out to you?" Dylan hesitated, looking down for a moment before lifting his eyes again. "She said she wanted to know what kind of person you are. She wanted to understand whether he was really planning to leave you or not." A quiet shock moved through Emily. She felt suddenly aware of every sound in the house. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft rain outside, Dylan's uneven breathing. "Leave me," she whispered. Dylan nodded, his face filled with regret. "I didn't believe it at first. I told her my dad wasn't that kind of man. But she said he made promises to her. Big ones. She said he talked about moving in with her, starting over. But then he kept delaying, so she started getting suspicious." Emily felt her knees weaken, so she moved slowly to the couch and sat down. She pressed her hands together to keep them from shaking. She had spent so many months trying to make her home warm, steady, loving. She had given everything she had. And now she learned that the man she trusted had made plans that did not include her at all. Dylan sat beside her but kept a respectful distance, as if afraid he might add to her pain just by being too close. "She sent screenshots," he continued quietly. "Messages. Plans they made. Dates. Conversations. She sent pictures of gifts he gave her. And she said she was tired of being hidden." Emily closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep. Why didn't you show me sooner?" Dylan looked down at his hands. "Because I kept hoping my dad would stop. I kept hoping he'd tell you himself and fix it before it got worse. I didn't want to break your heart. And I didn't want to lose him either." His voice cracked at the end of the sentence. A small sound of a young man trying to stay strong even as everything around him fell apart. Emily softened when she heard it. She placed her hand gently on his arm, not because she had the strength to comfort him, but because she felt how much this weighed on him too. "You didn't break anything," she said. "The truth did. And the truth is not your fault." Dylan looked up at her, eyes filled with gratitude and pain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued tapping softly on the windows, filling the silence with a gentle rhythm that somehow made the moment feel even more fragile. Then Emily stood. Dylan rose with her instinctively. Are you going to talk to him? He asked. Emily nodded. Yes. I need to hear whatever he has to say. Dylan took a slow step back. Do you want me to stay? Emily looked at him for a moment. He had been honest. He had been brave. He had carried a burden he never asked for. She felt a tenderness toward him, the kind of protective feeling she had never expected to form so strongly. Yes, she said softly. I'd like you to stay. I don't want to face this alone. Dylan nodded. A few hours later, the sound of Mark's car pulling into the driveway sliced through the quiet house like a warning. Emily felt her chest tighten. Dylan stood beside her, keeping his eyes on the door, his jaw tense. When Mark walked in, he looked tired, irritated, and distracted. The last thing he expected was to see Emily standing in the middle of the living room with a pile of hidden envelopes in her hand, and Dylan standing a few feet away, stiff and silent. What's going on? Mark asked, his voice uneasy. Emily took one quiet step forward. You tell me. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. Emily, I've had a long day. Can we not start something right now? But Emily's expression didn't change. When were you going to tell me? Or were you hoping I'd never find out at all? Mark's gaze shifted to the envelopes. Then to Dylan. A flash of anger crossed his face. You went through my things? I didn't have to, Emily said calmly. They were hidden behind a vase. And Dylan told me the truth. Mark turned sharply toward his son. You had no right. Dylan stepped forward with more courage than Emily had ever seen in him. No. You had no right. She deserved to know. She deserved the truth. Mark clenched his jaw, looking between the two of them. This is none of your business, Dylan. She's my family, Dylan said, voice steady. That makes it my business. Emily's breath caught at that. Her family. She hadn't expected him to say those words, but they reached straight into her heart. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing for a moment. Look, this got complicated. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Emily stared at him with a quiet sadness. Complicated, she repeated. That's the word you chose? Mark looked frustrated, trapped. I was confused, okay? Work has been stressful. I wasn't happy. I made mistakes. Emily's voice was soft but steady. Mistakes don't come with love letters. And promises. And plans to leave me. Mark froze. She knew then that everything Dylan had said was true. For a long moment, the house fell into a heavy silence. Emily felt something in her chest shift. Not just pain but clarity, the kind that comes after months of confusion. She spoke again, her voice low. If you wanted to leave, you could. I've just said it. You didn't need to break me slowly. Mark exhaled, dropping heavily onto the couch. Emily. I'm sorry. But the apology felt tired, empty, like words spoken because they were expected, not because they were true. Emily looked over at Dylan. He stood tall, steady, protective. She realized then that she wasn't alone. And she didn't need to hold on to someone who had already let go of her long before today. She took a deep breath and turned toward Mark. We're done. Mark's eyes widened. Emily. No. We're done, she repeated. Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't shake. She felt stronger than she had in months. She turned toward the hallway, but before she moved, she looked back at Dylan. Can you help me pack a few things? Dylan nodded immediately. Of course. Mark stood, panic rising in his voice. Emily, don't do this. We can fix it. She didn't turn around. You broke it. I'm just finally accepting it. As she walked toward her bedroom, she felt the weight of the last year slowly lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't gone, heartbreak never disappeared that quickly, but it was no longer suffocating her. Dylan followed her, quiet, supportive, ready to help her take the next steps. And as she started packing, she realized something unexpected. Pain had brought her to this moment, but truth, and the kindness of someone who cared, was what gave her the strength to walk forward. The house behind her might still be filled with the echo of betrayal, but the path ahead held something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.